Thank you, Katrina. Uh, for the past few weeks, we've been talking about the book Divine Audacity, which is, I think, a clear way to talk about what Charles Fillmore talked about, which was the 12 powers, the 12 spiritual gifts that we each have. In New Thought, most New Thought folks have studied and know something about these powers. They call them 12 powers. I think of them again as spiritual gifts. They are centers of energy within us that we can literally grow so that when we grow them together, we come into the fullness of our oneness, the fullness of spirit, the fullness of life itself. We can see more clearly about ourselves and others. And so this morning I want to share one of those powers. We've talked about faith, we've talked about imagination, love, we've talked about life, we've talked about strength, and several others that I can't think of right now. But anyway, because there's just too many of them. Anyway, this morning I want to talk about the one power that I believe opens the pathway to all powers, and that's the power of renunciation, the power of release, or some of us call it the power of forgiveness, the ability to forgive. You know, that's a grace. We've been given the grace to have that ability to forgive, because without it, we would all live in suffering. June 17th of last year, on TV, there was breaking news, and it was really breaking news. And it was about the 9 lives that had been lost, people who had been gunned down in Charleston, South Carolina, in that church. And as the world watched that and grieved with these folks, a few weeks later they had the trial for this fellow by the name of Roof. I've forgotten his first name. And he was a white supremacist. He was taught to be that. Didn't learn it just on his own. And took it obviously to, well, any form of it is an extreme, but to the ultimate extreme. And went to a prayer meeting at a black church, and after an hour, shot and killed 9 of the people before he was captured. A few weeks later, when he pleaded guilty and they had the sentencing, the relatives were able to speak. And every one of them gave the message of forgiveness, Here's what the one said that made national headline, and it captured the thoughts of all Americans, I believe, in the world. I forgive you. You took something very precious away from me. I will never get to talk to her ever again, but I forgive you, and I have mercy on your soul. You hurt me. You hurt a lot of people. God forgives you, and I forgive you. In Unity, we teach that God is unconditional love, and that which is unconditional love does not have to forgive. It is already done. For we are seen in our perfection rather than what we think are our imperfections. And those are just illusions to us. Because we have to see good and bad sometimes. We just feel like we have to, but we don't. And as we look at this power of renunciation, it reminds me of a discussion that I had with Gishi, who is a Buddhist priest who was here with the Buddhist, and some of what I read about Buddhism. And how do they move from being of the world to being in the world to some degree? And how do they move from letting their senses control them, because they don't think about it very much? That's when our senses really control us, when we don't give any thought to it, to stepping into a position of authority from within where we control our senses, where we don't let our eye determine what the truth is. We don't let our ears determine what the truth is. We don't let our feelings determine what the truth is. But instead, we are able to manage those so that we see through what we see into the truth of the matter. The Buddha said, when he was asked, what do you teach? He said, what I teach is just suffering and the cessation thereof. That's all I teach. And he explained that. And he said that, what is suffering? And suffering, he said, birth is suffering, old age and decay are suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. Now, I don't know what's left. Not much that we're not going to experience, okay? But we choose, if we want to, for it to be suffering. Or we can choose for it to be liberating, what we think is suffering, by learning from it and growing from it. And he said, you know, it is in oneself that we find the source of suffering. And it is self that must be renounced if one would be free from suffering, the concept of renunciation. We must renounce the little self, the little me, the little I, and step into the greater I am. Step into spirit itself and be the spiritual beings that we're called to be, that we are manifested into being. And we have a choice to be that. And as we do so, what happens is we start to grow. Now, if you were going to become a monk at 14, 15, 16, 19 years of age, most of the young men who were here were that age when they became monks, one of the first things you go through for a number of years is training on how to not let your eye, not let your five senses, what they call doorways into the world, control you. How you stay in control. And it takes them numbers of years to do that. Sometimes 8 to 10 years, they said. And then, after you've done that, you move to the next step, which is to recognize that it's not the senses but the mind, or the brain, that controls our thought process if we're not in control of it, in control of the brain. If we're not in control of the brain determines what we think. And it focuses on the five senses to do that. But they've moved past the five senses. Now they're looking at, what do I think? What am I? Who am I? How do I see the world? How do I live in the world? How do I act? And they spend a number of years determining what it is they have to release so they can be in the world and not of a world. Then the next step that they take is where, and then they've been doing this all along, where they really spend years in deep meditation. Deep meditation. And in that meditation, what they're doing is finding that place of peace. They are able to be the witness, to be the observer of what's going on within them and outside of them. And as they do that, they come to a point where they feel this thing that they call nirvana. You and I would call heaven on earth, I think. I was talking to Gishi, who was the head of the Buddhist group monks that were here, and I asked him about some of these things, you know. Do you ever get upset? And he said, oh, yeah, I get upset. I said, do you ever have any suffering goes with it? He said, no, I'm past that. But I get upset occasionally, and being upset is okay, as long as I manage it properly. Okay. Do you suffer? He said, I'm not sure. Sometimes I might. And he's been doing this for 30 years, 40 years, okay? And he still has a tendency to realize he might be suffering. But he said it's a fleeting moment. It's not something that stays with me. So I would say sometimes I'm in pain, but I'm not suffering. I said, all right. I said, how? Now, you went into a monastery. You've spent years doing this. How does somebody like Richard accomplish what you're accomplishing? I'm not going to go into a monastery. He laughed. And he said, you know, the Western world is different than the Eastern world, and we all know that, in the way we think, in the way that we operate. We are much more, and I'm not saying this negatively, but we are much more materialistic than much of the Eastern world. And in that materialism, we are caught up in a way of life that is necessary in a lot of ways. That doesn't mean we're captured by it, doesn't mean we're suffering because of it, but we're just caught up in it. And whether we're suffering because of it is up to us. And he said one of the things he believed is that in the Western world we have an opportunity to heal even quicker than the monk that goes into the monastery. If we want to, if we choose to. We have so many choices that we can make a choice if we would. And if we can, to step into the good, to step into not letting the world control us, but let the world just be what it is and not get all uptight about it. That's a choice we can make. That's how we can grow. That's how we can renounce the world. And he said the other thing is that the Western world really does teach forgiveness. And he chuckled and he said, I don't know if they really understand what that means. And I said, yeah, I know. I have a little problem with that one too. But anyway, he said, but we can learn to forgive because of so many things that happen to us. And it's not like I don't say that like we're victims. Things do happen to us. It's how we deal with them that makes a difference of whether we suffer through them or don't suffer through them. And the biggest factor in this spiritual gift of renunciation, the spiritual gift of being able to forgive ourselves and forgive others, is the power of forgiveness. Because if we can't forgive somebody, if we keep something on our hearts and on our minds, whether just at a moment and then later on it comes back and later on it comes back, maybe we don't think about it all the time. We don't think we're suffering, but we really are. We can even fool ourselves from that if we're not careful. Then what happens is that we block all the other spiritual gifts to some degree. We block love. We block faith. We block imagination. We block power itself. We block our true strength, which comes from spirit. Because we're not able to engage in those things fully because we still have this work to do within ourselves of needing to forgive and let go and let God. There was a young woman. In 1975, her husband left her for Kathy. Kathy was blue-eyed, blonde. The young woman felt a little more attractive than herself. And Kathy inflicted a great deal of pain and damage to her family as far as she was concerned. 1982, she is still suffering. At least twice a week she dreams of Kathy. If she sees a blonde with blue eyes, it's Kathy. And she keeps saying over and over again, Kathy, you hurt me. Kathy, you hurt my children. Kathy, you did damage to this wonderful life we were holding. Kathy this, Kathy that. That she couldn't even think straight because Kathy was always there. In 1982, 7 years later, and she tried a number of the, self-help things, not that there's anything wrong with those, and all those kind of things, but they just weren't working for her. And she saw on a bulletin board of a church, forgiveness can help you become whole. And she said, okay. And she went to this workshop. And she went several weeks. And towards the end of the workshop, they went into a time of silence, meditation. And Kathy was asked, as were others in the group, who are you willing to forgive this morning? And Kathy thought, well, I think I can forgive my mother some of the mistakes she made. Yeah, I could do that easy. My kids and I have had some problems, but I can forgive them. I can forgive my ex-husband. It wasn't his fault. I know, we think in strange ways, but it's okay. This is her writing, okay? And she said, but as I was saying that, all I heard was Kathy, 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 Kathy. And she said, it was like in my mind, and booming, Kathy, Kathy. And she said, I've got to forgive Kathy. And then she said as she got silent, she heard coming through her consciousness, "Are you ready to forgive Kathy?" And she said, "Yes, I am ready. I have to continue forward." And in that moment, she declared that she would forgive Kathy. She was amazed at what happened to herself. She was amazed how lifted she felt, how she felt light flowing through her. She said, "All these things were amazing to me. I just didn't expect that." And she slept for the next 10 days without thinking or dreaming, of Kathy at any moment. And when Kathy would come up, because she was in the habit of thinking about Kathy, right? But Kathy would come up, she would release it right away, and it brought no emotion to her. And she knew she had done her work. But she had one other thing she needed to do. She needed to send Kathy a letter, asking Kathy to forgive her for the thoughts she had about Kathy, and telling Kathy how she felt. And so she sent the letter. And she must have sent it in a beautiful way, because 2 days later, she got a phone call, and it was Kathy. And she said, and I heard her say, "This is Kathy." And she said, and I expected myself to just blow up, to get uptight. You know, one time in my life I had a phone call like that. Somebody called me that I felt had done me wrong. I didn't do that. I stayed uptight. I was tense. I was terse. And there was no room for reconciliation because of that. And I regretted that for a long time, until I made the reconciliation. I wasn't ready to forgive. But Kathy was being forgiven by this woman. And this woman said, "Hello, Kathy," and she said there was no emotion. I wasn't angry with her. "Thank you for calling me." Kathy said, "I want to share something with you." And what she shared with her, she said, "I'm not apologizing for marrying your husband. I loved him. But I am apologizing that it caused so much pain for you and for your family. I am truly sorry for that. And I've wondered about it and worried about it at times. So thank you for forgiving me, and I forgive you also for any thoughts you've had about me, but thank you for forgiving me." That was the end of the conversation. And so this young woman, about 6 months later, felt a call to move out of the community, to start a new life, to change her life, if you would, and her surroundings. What it reminded me of a fellow sitting on the porch in a small town, and he's sitting there in a rocking chair, and a car drives up and rolls the window down and says, "Hey, buddy." He says, "Hi, how you doing?" He said, "Tell me, did you, what's this town like? I'm thinking about moving here." And the fellow says to him, "Well, tell me, what was the town like where you lived?" He said, "The people were terrible. Couldn't get along with anybody." He said, "The government was terrible." He said, "It was just a ridiculous place to live, and I just wanted to move out. What's it like here?" And the old man in the rocking chair said, "It's just the same here." Oh, so the guy drove off. A few minutes later, another guy drove up. Says, "Hey, man, I'm thinking about moving here. What's it like here?" He said, "What was it like where you lived?" He said, "The people were wonderful. We had a great church. We had a great community. I loved the people there. I was active in the community. People were good to us. There was great opportunity. But I got transferred here. What's this town going to be like?" And the old fellow said, "It'll be just like the one you left." You see, you can't carry with you the past. You can't move from one house to another and think that it's all been fixed if you haven't done the work in the house you're in. That's how we get rid of the suffering. That's how we get rid of, and we don't think in terms of suffering many times, because we think suffering means a lot of pain over a long period of time. And I mean real physical pain a lot of times. Suffering is really being caught up in something you don't feel like you have any control over, and it stays with you and stays with you and stays with you. And so we can release that suffering if we're willing to change, if we're willing to forgive. The question I have for each and every one of you this morning is, who is a Kathy in your life? Maybe there is one, more than one, or maybe there's none now. And thank God if that's the truth. And it can be little Kathys in your life. The little Kathys are things people do that irritate you. And you get upset by them. And you stay upset by them. And every time it happens, you're upset again. I mean, people who are married know nothing about that. So we have to watch out for the little Kathys because they grow into big Kathys if we're not careful. And so this morning, what I truly believe, as it says right up here, is we awaken to our inner power when we awaken to our ability to forgive ourselves first. You can't forgive Kathy unless you forgive yourself first. Because it's your illusion, it's your seeing through your eyes and believing what you're hearing that creates that false Kathy. When you can see Kathy as your friend, when you can see Kathy as one who teaches you, when you can see Kathy as the Christ, the divine, no matter how Kathy acts, it's then that you can step into all the other powers and be that unlimited possibility, that manifestation of God that guides you and directs you and holds you in light and love. I see that forgiveness here. I have had people experience or share their experiences of forgiveness with me. I've had people who say they can't forgive and in time have done it. We all have the capacity to change our minds. The word repent in Greek doesn't mean come to Jesus. It really doesn't. It means change your mind. See things differently. Let the Kathys in your life light up your life, not draw you down. God bless you.